Well, hello everybody. So here's a question that just came in this afternoon, and the question I got was specifically about the domain part of f minus g of x. Okay, so I will tell you um, the answer to that ultimately, but I want to start with something else. Okay, uh, because I want to keep the big picture in mind. So in any case, I want you to look at these three functions, okay? F of x equals 6, f of x equals x plus 2, f of x equals x squared plus 5x plus 1. All of these functions have a domain of negative infinity to infinity, which is all numbers. Any number that you could plug in for x in these functions is going to give you an answer. That's why every number is in the domain. We don't leave anything out, okay? If this function f of x equals 6 seems a little weird, it's just a function where y is equal to 6 no matter what the x is. Okay? For these other functions, you're going to get different y's when you put in different x's. But this one, we just get y equals 6 no matter what x is. If x is 1, y is 6. If x is 14, y is 6. You get the idea. Now, they all have this domain because neither of them contain the kind of things that we want to avoid at this point. Okay, I said that no matter what you plug in for x, you're going to get an answer for y in these functions. Every x works. What kind of x, what doesn't work? If you have a number and you divide it by 0, that doesn't work. So we avoid that. But none of these have division, so that's not an issue. And then roots of negative numbers. Okay, but none of these have roots, so that's not an issue either. Okay? All right, so I want to start there. Now, back over here, let's look at this. Here's the question from my math lab that we were given. F of x is 6 plus 5 over x. G of x is 5 over x. So I will do this in two parts. Part 1, what's f minus g of x? And part 2, what's the domain of f minus g of x? Okay, so f minus g of x is just what it probably seems like it is. It's the function f of x, 6 plus 5 over x, minus g of x. And then we would write that down and we would simplify it however we can. Okay? In this case, the only thing I can do to simplify it is to cancel the 5 over x minus 5 over x, and I'll get just 6. Okay? So f minus g of x is going to be just 6. That's it. Okay? So there's our answer. That part, that's not so bad. Maybe that's uncontroversial, right? But there it is, f minus g of x is equal to 6. Okay, no big deal. Part 2, what's the domain of f minus g of x? Well, okay. For this, I'll tell you that it's all numbers except 0. Okay? In other words, it's negative infinity, if we write it as an interval, to 0, skipping over the 0, picking back up and going to infinity. There's your domain. All numbers except 0. I could make it as a verbal statement, or I can write it down as an interval. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, well, I've contradicted myself. Here's this function, which is just 6. And I'm telling you it has a domain of all numbers except 0. But over here, when I started, I said that that function would have a domain of all numbers. So it seems like I'm making a contradiction or something. Well, okay, so here's the difference. In this case, I just gave you these functions, okay? I just said, here they are. I didn't tell you where they came from or anything about them. I just said these are what the functions are, take them at face value. But here, this function came from somewhere. And we always look at where the function came from in order to find the domain, because when you start canceling it, simplifying, and so on, you lose some information. Okay? So we're going to look here for the domain. We're going to look here at the unsimplified form of the function to figure out what the domain is. That's what we do. this function came from there. So that's where we have to look. Okay, so keep that in mind, that we approach it that way for a function that came from something else, as is the case here. So tell me, if you have this function 6 plus 5 over x minus 5 over x, what would you avoid? Well, we can't divide by 0, so that means the x, this thing that we're dividing by, can't be 0. So the domain is all numbers except 0. Okay? Alright, so I hope that explains the difference between the two, and I think your instinct might very well be to say with this function that the domain is everything. That's why I started with this, because I think that's probably what your instinct is. Okay, so I wanted to address that, not leave it out. But do you see how it's different here? Do you see how it's different if the function that we're looking at, that we're trying to find the domain of, came from some other place?